Hello, this is Carrie again, and I have for you today probably the most controversial video I have done so far. So I want you to stay with me, and hopefully we'll learn some things together. All right, so here is my topic for today: is are colored pencil names racist? Wow, talk about just being big. So we're going to talk about a few colors in particular. We're going to talk about Indian red. We're going to talk about flesh tones, and we're going to talk about what they mean and what they don't mean. So first thing we're going to start with is Indian red. Now, for those of you who are Americans, and for those of you who, or for those of you who aren't American and who might not know about the history of Native Americans in America, for a long time, Native Americans faced a great deal of prejudice and discrimination and were often disparagingly called things like redskins or red men or things of that nature. So, for some Americans, the color Indian red sort of it seems to be an allusion to that. However, it didn't take long to do some research and to realize that Indian red actually has nothing to do with Native Americans. And Indian red is a color that comes from a dye used in India, as in India, the country. So, for the first question, is Indian red racist? The answer is no. Indian red is actually one of my favorite colors, and I have tried it for pretty much every medium that I've gotten, and I love it. It's a sort of earthy red. Crayola has renamed it chestnut, and I wasn't able to find the exact year that Crayola made that change, but my guess is they made that change to avoid confusion. Personally, I would have been fine if they had gone with something like Indian dye red or something along those lines. So, as to the question of is Indian red racist? No, it's a dye used in India, and in fact, if you know, once you start getting more into these colors, a lot of colors are named after places in which they are often used. So you have the two that popped into my head was Venetian red and Pompeian red. So those are two. Those are two that I can think of. There's another one. There's Persian blue, and there's other dyes that are other colors that are named after dyes. In used in various locations. Now the most controversial one is, and I've talked briefly about it in a previous video that I did, is this fun little gem. Hold on. Let's see. I got another one. I have medium flesh and light flesh, and I think not. Now I called them up, and they did say that by flesh, they do mean skin and not meat. So that answers that question. Now, in America, the probably the biggest company, of American origin or popular in America is Crayola, and they renamed their flesh tone in the 1960s. I want to say like 68 or 65. I didn't get the exact number, or I didn't write it down. They renamed their flesh colors along the names of peach and other such things. And part of this had to do with the civil rights movement at the very end of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. A number of studies from the 1950s, probably the most famous one was from Brown versus the Board of Education, in which children were shown a black doll and a white doll, and they had different associations, negative associations to the black dolls. And I'm sure that the nature of the civil rights movement and that study in particular probably prompted Crayola to change that name. And I think that that was probably a good idea at the time based on what was going on in the culture. So that is why, when you have companies like Prismacolor, sometimes people will get sets and they'll say, oh, there's no flesh tone in there. There is what, the pinks that people would use for Caucasian skin, tones like this. The tones do exist in those sets. They'll just have different names. I have a set of Prismacolors, and they do have very similar colors to these, but they're called something else, usually peach or something along those lines. So those colors do exist, and that's why, for a lot of Americans, you might not see those colors. Now, when you get into the fun parts, or maybe not so fun parts, the fun part is when you start going international, like for example, Faber Castell is a German company. So I don't expect them to understand or to adhere to the norms of American culture. I mean, it's an international company, and they are well within their rights to name their colors as they see fit. Probably the most interesting one is a color from this company that I don't have the color. This is a Copic marker. This is chestnut. This is what I use to try to match my skin. Hold on, I'm gonna do it this way so that I don't bleed through the paper. But this is the color that I got to try to match my skin, and I think this chestnut is a fairly good match. But anyway, this company has a color called Skin White, which if a company like Crayola did that today, that probably would, they would probably almost certainly get protests at their gates. But again, this is Copig is a Japanese company, so they have different norms and different practices there. So it's not, I can't say what their, what sort of issues they have regarding race. I didn't study the Japanese culture, although I did spend time in Japan. It was a lot of fun, and I totally loved being in Japan, by the way. Sorry, irrelevant, but I can't say, like I'm assuming positive intent, and I'm assuming that there was no negative intent in calling color skin white. I'm just going to assume that they just didn't think about it in those terms, because they don't have the same kind of history that we do here in America with the issues regarding race that we have here in America. So that's so those are the biggest the biggest questions that I had, and to sort of talk about them. And I don't think there's anything wrong with sort of pointing out, hey, Indian red, somebody might be offended by that, but we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to be honest about our history and the mistakes that have been made in the past in order to learn from that. For me, the saddest thing is having the name change from Indian red to chestnut. I thought that was slightly sad, because I feel like it's okay to learn from your past, but I understand the move. I probably would have named it something like Indian dye red, but that's just me, and it's not my company, and it's not my choice to say. Anyway, so that's that. Other interesting colors is Hooker's Green, which when I told my wife there was a color called Hooker's Green, she almost dropped her food. She was like, oh my God. And it's like, okay, so Hooker's Green is actually named after a guy named Hooker, who was an artist and a botanist. So he used a lot of greens, and that's where the color is named from. There's another interesting color called Ivory Black, which is made from charred animal bones that have been, basically burned animal bones, and that's how they get that. That's how they got the pigment. So I'm not sure if this, like every single Ivory Black gets their pigments that way, or if every Indian red gets their pigment that way, or so on and so forth. But that's just where the color is sort of inspired by. So that's something interesting. So anyway, that's it. This I didn't want this to be a long lecturing post or anything like that. I just wanted to sort of talk openly about this, and get some honesty out there, so people know where different people are coming from. But anyway, if you have any other colors with funny names that you saw and that you'd like for me to talk about, or that you want to talk about, like what are some other funny or interestingly named colors that you saw and that you were like, well, what's that all about? Leave it in the comments. And if there are any other controversial art-related topics or controversial coloring-related topics that you want me to take on, let me know, and I will try to do my best with them and try to handle them in the best way possible. So anyway, thank you for staying with me, and stay with me, because I am currently running a giveaway of Joanna Bransford's brand new book, Lost Ocean. And if you subscribe to my channel, you are entered into a chance to win that giveaway. So thank you, and have a great day. And I'll see you later. Bye.